What's going on, everybody? We got a very special video today. I got a chance to talk to three of the combat developers for Sony Santa Monica, Mihir Sheth, Denny Yeh, and Rob Meyer. It was a really fun interview. Got to talk about God of War 2018, and of course, God of War Ragnarok. A lot about the combat, a little bit about speedrunning, some stuff about allergies. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you to Sony for making this possible. Thank you to their PR team. I really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get into the interview. Okay. So does everybody want to introduce yourselves? You want me to introduce you? Who do we got here?
I can start and pass it along.
Cool.
Hey everyone, my name is Mihir Sheth, and I was one of the combat leads on God of War Ragnarok. Go ahead, Rob.
I'm Rob Meyer. I was a senior staff technical combat designer on God of War Ragnarok.
And I'm Denny. I'm the other combat lead, God of War Ragnarok.
Well, it is nice to finally meet all you in person. I've heard your voices before plenty of times, but very nice to meet you all.
Likewise.
Okay. So to start, I mean, anybody can kind of answer whichever way you want. We'll start, I guess, with enemies. Do you guys collaborate on enemies? Do you have specific enemies that you work on? And if you did, what did you work on? What did you develop in Ragnarok?
Yeah, so for enemies, it generally starts out pretty loose in terms of like generally we'll get some guideline information on what the enemies are going to be about, like from the director. We'll have some general ideas about what the environment they're going to be on, like what the general idea of the character is, like what the family is, what their general abilities might be. And then usually there's a point person from design, combat design, that will take over, like, gathering ideas, doing brainstorming and such. And then sometimes the ownership of the enemies will change over time. But throughout the course of the project, each enemy, each boss will generally have one point of contact from the combat design side. So for example, Rob was the point of contact for the the Phantom, is that the name? Yeah, the Phantom.
That guy.
And then he also did like the twin Valkyries, First and Mist. He was responsible for the Gna fight. So usually, like, I guess Rob, you can talk more about it more specifically.
Sure, yeah. Like it will, like Denny said, there will be times where a combat designer is exhibiting a large deal of sort of ownership and responsibility over an individual boss or enemy. So the ones that I owned for most of my time on the project were the Phantom, the Frost and Lava Phantom, and then Frist and Mist, the Twin Valkyries, and Na, the Valkyrie Queen. But usually on top of that, combat designers are also supporting different features across the whole cast. So like I worked on status effects, or I worked on like certain types of reactions to some of the arrows, like the sigil arrows, and those things are across the whole enemy cast. So there'll be lots of things like that where combat designers will own individual enemies and bosses, but maybe they're also responsible for like the R3 stun grabs or, deaths or this or that. So it's a really good system where people can like have ownership over their things, but also like have their hands in sort of everything on the project.
Awesome.
Yeah. Also, there's like designers that don't like own specific content, but they support like the game as a whole, right? So like designers might be in charge of making the tech that is basically helping us make all the boss fights, or setting up the general like positioning AI of enemies. And doesn't necessarily mean that they're owning those characters, but they're owning the systems like surrounding them.
Gotcha. So for people that don't know exactly how tech works, like myself, the process for designing an attack pattern, specifically bosses, how does that kind of work?
So we won't really like get into like the tech, because I don't think that's as interesting to talk about here, but we can talk about like the general design process of it. So
Yeah.
from the combat side, like what we usually try to keep in mind is first thing we would ask is like, what is the purpose of this enemy? So one example would be probably the easiest example would be something like Gna, like some of the challenge bosses like Gna or the Warrior Souls. Like the purpose of those characters, they're very gameplay centric, right? They're about challenging the player, they're about testing the player's mastery and such. So when we design the attacks of those characters, we have very specific things in mind about what those attacks are trying to achieve. So like will have attacks that test your mastery of dodging in certain directions, or test your mastery of like different timings for parrying things, or test your mastery of like the Valkyries, for example, had attacks where they'll fly in the air and you have to throw your axe at them to knock them down. There was one mechanic which was a little bit more obscure where the Valkyrie did like her flashbang attack and you had to actually look away. That was trying to test quick turn or like just mastery of your camera in general. So for characters like that, yeah, for characters like that, it's very like much more I guess free for the combat designer in terms of like really being able to push, you know, like what those attacks do, because those characters are meant to be challenging and meant to really like push the limits of the combat system. Whereas there's other characters like, for example, basic Draugr or basic enemies where they're more about like they're more like punching bags, like they need to be fun to beat up. They might have attacks that kind of like test very specific things, but they're a little bit more one note because they're meant to be used in groups, and they're more like chess pieces where if you mix the different pieces together, then you might get more interesting combinations, but alone they're not really meant to like, you know, push the limits of the player's cognitive load.
Gotcha. Speaking of the Valkyries, who's responsible for the Valhalla and the Asgard attack? The For Asgard attack. Who did that?
Yeah.
Which one?
There's a lot of people responsible for all the things
There's
surrounding
a lot of people
Valkyries.
that want to know who did that.
Probably the tuning for it, like in terms of how quick it is, I would say I'm probably the biggest culprit for it, because generally the way we work is, yeah, you can blame me. But generally the way we work is like there's all the other departments that surround the enemy. So like Valkyrie, for example, we had a really good animator who Dennis Fina, who basically like did all the animations, adjusted them all, and then I took his animations and I kind of like spliced them all into ways where it'll kind of be fun in terms of like gameplay. So that Valhalla attack, for example, I controlled how long the Valkyrie was in the air after they jumped up in the air. So actually, I think first test I did was like she would jump up, there'd be a longer beat, and then they would land. But since there wasn't really that much going on after they leave the screen, that wasn't as engaging. So I sped it up as fast as I could, where basically she jumps up and then instantly like lands back. So that makes it more engaging because the moment you see her fly up, you have to be really on the ball to like dodge the attack.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, and yeah, so a lot of the like attack animations and like the gameplay, it evolves like really like I don't think you can really like one person can really take credit for any of that. It's really like the combination of just like the overall paper design and the animations that are coming and the effects and everything. The combat designer is really the person that puts it all together, but it's like all the pieces kind of like mixed to really make what the final product is.
Just
So
to add to that a little bit,
collective
I think some of the fun aspects of those moves and almost like the meme quality of those moves is a little bit more organic, right? Like the Valhalla Stomp being a great example where so much of that move is the vocal delivery, you know, Valhalla every single time. Like it's so in your face, and it's kind of tuned in a way where that's kind of like a kill move, right? Like it's a move where you'll often die, or you know, you'll get you know, it'll kind of lead to those frustrating moments. And I think like in development, some of that isn't well known in advance, right? Like we're trying a lot of different things before it reaches the eventual conclusion that players play, right? So for a while that move would have different tuning, maybe it has the audio, maybe it doesn't. And eventually when we get closer and closer to the end of the game, we start seeing how it all pieces together. And I always look back at that move as an example of just like it's kind of awesome that that's become part of the culture of God of War, that everyone knows that Valhalla Attack, everyone has some nightmare about it, you know. And you can see on Ragnarok, right? Like Rob took the design of Gna, and we did a similar thing with For Asgard in there because it's a callback to that attack being so memorable. So I think like there's a lot of different things from the designers to the animators to different people working on it, but I think also some of it is more organic and just kind of happens throughout the development, and then we might pick up on that and emphasize it further, or we might even find a few of them that are surprises. We really only see that reaction when players actually get their hands on the game.
Plus, it's like a fun opportunity to play off of it. So like in the Gna fight, when you get hit by it, you're like, oh my god, this move again. But like when you're matching
That was
to
my
escape
thought.
from it, Freya will actually come in and like take not off you a little bit earlier, faster than it would for the Valkyries in the last game. And then now all of a sudden you feel the presence of Freya, who's like kind of like saving you from this like classic kill move moment. So it's like fun to call back to the previous game, but just like add a little bit of tweaks and twists that show like we're aware of this kind of callback, but we're like presenting it in a very in-game way that kind of subverts it.
Yeah, having Freya in there was a very cool addition. Very, very nice to see. Little switch. Each of you, favorite armor, shield, weapon. What would be your setup in Ragnarok when you're playing? If you had an
I know
ideal
Rob's.
setup, what do you want?
Yeah,
Rob, you
Denny
go
knows my
first.
armor. I feel like I know Mihir's shield. You know, we know each other's. I could start. My favorite armor set is the Mani's armor set, which is the one where the chest armor increases the damage of the extinguished flames and vaporized frost skills. And the wrist and waist armor of that set increase the duration of status effects on enemies. And the reason I love it is actually just I love extinguished flames and vaporized frost, which I can't take credit for. I think it was Mihir or Kevin or someone, but which is basically when you apply frost to an enemy, if you switch to the blades and you start hitting them with the blades, like the blades against a frosted enemy does bonus damage, and same vice versa for if you use the axe against a burning enemy. And I just always thought it was really fun to like have those little short-term goals to build up the status effects, then switch weapons and hit them with the opposite weapons, and then like switch back. And so I always loved that dynamic. So the Mani's armor set, like just enabling that dynamic and buffing it even more was one of my favorites. I have some other favorites too, but I'll let these guys answer first.
Who's next?
I'll go next. It's going to be hard for me to answer this because my general way, you know, working on the hero character and kind of being responsible for a lot of that is just playing with a lot of different combinations, and mostly the way my brain operates is kind of the inverse for most players, where I'm thinking about, you know, along with Rob and Denny's help over, you know, how are all of these going to be viable, right? Like we want there to be customers for everything that's in the game, right? So, you know, majority of players, once they get the Berserker armor, they're like, you know, this is awesome, this is the greatest armor, which is fantastic. We want that kind of reward, but we're also looking at every little piece of armor in between, right? So for example, one of the actual pieces of armor that I'm a big fan of, which isn't super popular, is actually of the Alfheim set, the chest armor, which is not the Realm Shift one, right? The Realm Shift one we know is something that players love, and that's awesome. But that armor piece actually rewards you for evading at the last moment in a different way, right? To say, hey, you know, there's some other part of your kit that you want to use. When you do that, it's not just the Realm Shift. And I think like that's one of the things that I always like looking across the armor sets and the gear sets is like, you know, this game is going to be very popular when it comes out, but it's also going to live beyond that. And for players that return to it and kind of want to dig into things like yourself, you know, seen a lot of your videos and you like diving in there and finding the different build possibilities, trying to find ones that are a little bit it's a little bit of a hipster answer. It's like the ones that are not super common are the ones that I tend to like. And then
That's
as far
fair.
as shield is concerned, yeah, Rob's probably guessing this one, but I think the Shatterstar shield for me is the one that I have a soft spot for. It's
I would
just
have guessed
something
that
that's
too.
yeah, it's a couple of different reasons. One is that it kind of has the fastest, you know, block canceling for the nerdy players out there. So it allows you to kind of, you know, cancel some of the animations in there, but also just the idea of like charging on the downbeat, you know, in those more calmer moments in the fight, you can start charging up. Yeah, there's a couple of secret nuance stuff in there too. So yeah, what about you, Danny?
It's the most Mihir answer I could have ever hoped for. Yeah, I like all of them. I like the ones that people usually don't like, you know.
I gotta be a little bit hipster, you know how it is.
Manny's
like
armor
everything
is
you
already
don't.
kind of a hipster answer.
True.
But
Yeah, for me, I'd say, I mean, like Mihir and Rob, I mean, we all played with everything, and we did our best to really like balance the tuning of it all. I think for me, just personally, my favorite is not really a build, but the tier thing is more like a way of life, where basically that's the artifact where you can charge it up, it'll drain your health, and then you'll do like a big chunk of damage. And the reason I like that is because it plays with a lot of cool systems, and you can like build a lot of cool things around it. So like we have the enchantment set that scales your damage based on based on your vitality, how much health you have left. When you're low health, you deal more damage. And then also just the fact that it drains a flat amount of health also makes it so that the vitality stat is a little bit more important in terms of like how much health it has, right? I always had this pet peeve on int 8 where int 8 is the internal name for God of War 2018. I always had this pet peeve of God of War 2018 where I felt like the vitality stat was pretty bad because every point of vitality gave you like half a hit point. Sorry, I'm just gonna go on this vitality rant right now.
The people need to
You're
hear
getting
it.
pure
do it.
unhinged Denny, by the
I
way.
wanna
This
hear
is
it.
some
I wanna
quality
hear it.
content.
So one of my primary goals this time around was to make vitality actually useful. So we buffed how much health vitality gives you. We also for defense as well. We gave a lot more ways for those stats to like change. Basically turn those defenses into offense. So I feel like with Tearfing and with some of those enchantment sets and some of the armors that give you some cool bonuses with vitality, it gives you like a nice different way to play where it feels a little bit more like, a little in theme with Kratos where he's like a berserker where he doesn't care as much about taking the damage. Actually, he thrives on getting hit and he just gets stronger the more damage he gets.
Yeah, one of my
I
other
would
favorite armor
agree.
sets is the Steinbjorn armor because the only set it gives you such a high amount of defense, and the chest is like this perk where after you take damage, your hits can regen some of it. But the beauty is when you combine the full Steinbjorn set with the enchantment sets that scale off your defense stat. So like the Niflheim set or the Svartalheim set, which increases your stun based on your defense. It's sort of like Denny said, it's a way to kind of like twist the defense stat in a way that you couldn't on God of War 2018 into something that provides like both defense and like alternate kinds of offense. And I really like that sort of fun like stat armor matchmaking system.
That defense is actually fantastic in this game. Probably my favorite stat.
There it is.
Yeah. Were there any combat functions that were considered for the game that never made it in?
Yeah, I mean, I can't get into the details of what those things are, but what I can say is that what players end up seeing at the end is such a there's so much that goes on in game development, right? Like these projects take, many years, and we try loads and loads of different things behind the scenes. Sometimes reasons why things change is that because while they might seem interesting on first glance, they actually don't gel well with the rest of the systems, right? And sometimes, even in God of War Ragnarok, I'm sure there's many systems that are like this, that they kind of lead to what we would call like worse game health, right? So a system individually might be kind of cool, but it kind of makes the overall game click worse. And other times it's because of other reasons, which again, players might not be aware of. Maybe the cost to actually implement something all the way through might be too high or it doesn't seem worth it, right? Like when we ask ourselves, what would it really take to make this, at shippable quality? It's like, oh boy, okay, there's this problem, there's that problem. Doesn't really seem worth it, right? So I mean, there's especially for a character like Kratos who really has so many abilities through the through his whole move set, through the runic attacks, through the armor sets that he has. There's so many different avenues of where we can try stuff, and I think that's like a blessing and a curse, right? Like we're all fans of combat and of combat games. We play lots and lots of games that have combat, from fighting games to action games, and we're always looking for inspiration and kind of doing our own twist on it. So we actually prototype so many different things. Some of them start with on one character, and actually that idea gets transferred over, right? Maybe an enemy starts doing an attack that actually kind of resembles something that Kratos does, or maybe a companion. The same thing kind of happens. So, I won't go into any details that aren't in the final game, but what I will say is that yeah, there's lots of stuff that we try. Some of it ends up coming into the game in different ways. Some things that were core mechanics, actually we move them onto armor, so only players that want to do that can. But we don't kind of enforce that on everyone else, right? So it's a lot of juggling. It's a lot of creating things that we think are interesting and fun, and then juggling them around and putting them in the right spot.
Gotcha. Now, obviously, just a yes or no question. Are there any secrets involving the combat that people haven't found yet, or can you not even answer that?
I'll say that I don't know if secrets is the right word, but I would say there's and there's lots of players of the game, and so I've only seen a subset through YouTube and Twitter and what people are posting. I would say there are still some interactions or certain types of things that I have yet to see players kind of find out or showcase. but I don't know if I'd call them secrets or not, right? Like the game is organic enough and we want it to be creative enough where, you know, players can leave their own stamp on the game, right? You can have certain combos or sequences or little moments that feel special and kind of feel like they're your own. And I'm always, you know, I think the three of us we're always we have like a text message chat where we're always posting stuff that we find and sharing stuff. Some of them are your links, you know, links to your videos, but kind of all over, and we always get excited when we see something where someone discovered or came across something. And sometimes we're surprised too, because we'll see a lot of stuff that we don't even know, or we hadn't expected or seen before, and we're like, "Oh my
That
god,
was
is
going
that
to be another
possible?"
question. That's awesome. I actually have some questions that my community put in. I was going to ask a few of them here. One's from Spark. Says the combat system in God of War 4 and God of War Ragnarok are very clearly unique and innovative. Are there any games that inspired parts of the combat systems for each of you?
I would say there's probably no like specific games to really mention, but like Rob, Mihir, and I, and a lot of combat designers really like we're all like Mihir was saying, we're all big fans of like, you know, combat in games. So we play like all sorts of things, right? We play a lot of fighting games. There's a lot of references to fighting games in the way we do things. Any kind of like action adventure, combat focused games like Devil May Cry, all those kind of games. Like we take inspiration from all of them in terms of like just the like general sense of like, oh, how did we feel when we were playing this? What do we like about just like the general flow of this, and what are ways we can like achieve kind of like the same sort of things that we liked about it while still keeping it feeling like God of War, right? So a lot of combat games, they're a little bit more hardcore, where it's a little like it's catering to the crowd where like you have to be a little bit more advanced in terms of like, you know, physical dexterity, a little bit stronger in terms of like just general game sense. Whereas God of War, we want to make sure we basically appeal to everyone, where even if you're not a player that really like is into combat games, our job is to try to make it such that after you play God of War, you're interested in trying out other games that maybe are focused on combat, even though you didn't really care about it as much in the past. So it's really about trying to find ways to look at games where we love the combat in them and find ways to uh, create them and add them to our game in such a way that it really is like accessible to basically any kind of player.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think to add to that, like I think you're going to find this with every game designer that works on games, right? You're always looking around for inspiration from other games, and sometimes you find inspiration in areas where, let's say, even if you don't like the particular system, or maybe your experience with the game wasn't incredible, as a designer, you're breaking everything down. And actually, some of the most cool mechanics or ideas are sometimes in games that maybe aren't even critically acclaimed, right? Like as game players, we always look at games that receive very high scores or sell a lot or do really well. But I think as designers, you're kind of always looking around and looking for, okay, well, this game did actually something kind of interesting. Could we take that? Could we build upon it? Could we try our own approach on it? And I think we're always trying to be inspired and open and kind of bash those ideas amongst ourselves, right? So Denny might play a game and bring something up, and we'll have a discussion about it. Or Rob, will write a long document about a breakdown of a certain game and how they do something, and we'll go back and forth on it. So I think we're just fans of games. Like we enjoy playing games, like combat games. I think Denny's point about fighting games is absolutely true. Like as a combat designer, you're always excited to see fighting games and fighting game characters because they're like, they're just taking ideas and building them out. And then we look at them and say, okay, we're not going to take that to 100%. We're going to dial it down a bit, but we're going to try to make it more approachable, get more people to like it. Because if there's a player who doesn't like combat games and plays God of War and learns that, you know what, I kind of like this. This is actually kind of fun, right? I want to replay the game again on a higher difficulty and get more into the combat. That's fantastic. Like that's our very little makes us more happy than seeing players get more into combat and then maybe go off and play other types of games, return back to God of War. That's kind of what we're, as designers, what we're after.
No, that's awesome. That's great. How deep in development were they when they came up with the Dropnir spear as the third weapon? And were there any other weapons that could have made it into the final game at all?
So yeah, I'm probably gonna stick away from anything that we don't actually have in the game. But I will say that the spear actually was thought about very early on into development. Actually, the game director Eric Williams kind of came forward with the idea of, let's return to Kratos' roots as a Spartan general, right? Like the whole premise of Ragnarok is, Kratos is going to have to lead this war, and he is a general, right? So let's bring some of that back. And what better way to do that than return his roots with the spear? But there have been quite a few different spears in God of War, right? Spear of Destiny early on, and Arms of Sparta in previous God of War games. So we wanted to do a take on a spear that, while it paid homage to his roots, it felt different. It felt new. It felt a little bit exciting. And I think the idea of duplication with the Dropnir ring kind of came in initially from from Eric and in a narrative sense, and then we kind of interpreted that in gameplay and how we wanted to do that, as well as one of the other kind of core tenets of it being the elemental siphon, which Rob here actually worked a bunch on and tried to figure out how to make that actually feel almost like a secondary thing that players learn, right? Like they first get the spear and they're having fun throwing it and detonating it, and then they kind of learn, like, wait a second, there's something a little bit more interesting going on with this spear. Rob, you
I
want to talk
love the
about that a little
siphon
bit?
part of it.
Yeah. No, Mihir kept on having to tell me to make the siphon less cool, so it's going to overwhelm everything else in the spear. No, not really. But yeah, the siphon part of it was really fun. I mean, it wasn't my idea, like Denny was saying before. Like all these ideas are kind of like bouncing around fluidly, but I kind of got the opportunity to work on it and build it out, and I was already kind of deep into like status effects and other elemental systems in the game. And that was just a feature with the spear that was like a really fun little side initiative, and it was really important for us to make it super cohesive with everything else that the spear could do, right? So like once you siphon an element out of an enemy, for those who don't know, there's a skill in the spear skill tree called elemental siphon. If you hold R2, you kind of stab your spear into an enemy and you yank it out, and now the spear is like buffed with the element of that enemy. So if you do it against a Draugr, now you have like a fire spear. And it was also really important, like, okay, well, now if I throw that spear, I'm throwing the fire spear. Now there's a fire spear embedded in someone. Now if I detonate that, it does a little fire explosion. So it was about making sure it was super well integrated to everything else that the spear could do, so that it felt like one cohesive weapon, even though there was these features that might have at first seemed kind of separate. So that's kind of when it all really came together and got fun. And there was a ton of effort, from the VFX team and animation team and programmers, making sure that all worked super fluidly as you expect. Oh, if I change weapons and I change back and all the little details, but that's sort of where the fun of game development is. It's like we have this idea for the elemental siphon. It has like a lot of appeal and novelty, and a lot of people like, oh, it looks really cool right away. But then all the little details that need to be figured out to make it cohesive and to make it work with everything else in the game, and to make it, fulfill your expectations, and also like just give you a cool fantasy, but also surprise you. That's where all the fun work really comes in.
Now, you guys know I'm a speedrunner. If you don't, most people do. But have any of you tried speedrunning before? Have you ever tried to get into it? If you did, like what did you try to speedrun? I want to know.
So actually, during the development of this game, when I was testing out all of like Rob's build, so like Rob working on a lot of the equipment stuff and all the perks and stuff. One metric I was using to really like try to give Rob feedback and balance feedback on all the equipment was I basically just did speed runs of fighting the Na or fighting the Berserker King. So basically, I timed myself with different builds, and I would just track how fast I can beat them. And that's pretty fun, and that resulted in a few nerfs that I'm sure Rob is aware of.
Please tell me you guys have a little board with all your times written down.
I think probably my fastest time for the Berserker King was like 1:40 or something. I think I was with a build where it was the realm shift limbs, where the realm shift limbs was like when you do the last second dodge, it does a realm shift. And then I had the Surtur armor, where basically it does bonus damage if you're attacking an enemy while they're in the middle of an attack. So basically what you would do is you would dodge an enemy's attack. They would still be considered in the middle of an attack, and then you'd go to town while you're getting the counter attack bonus damage. And then it had a bunch of different enchantments. So that resulted in us nerfing the realm shift limbs. those limbs used to have like extra stats on them, but now they don't. They're just like very pure strength and defense. And I'm sure there's a lot of other things that I don't remember that Rob remembers me like telling him about that maybe he didn't want to nerf, but he did because he's a
Mani's
great team
armor is one of
player.
them. The chest armor used to be, the Mani's chest armor used to
Rob's
be even
favorite
stronger, and I loved it so much, but I had to recognize that it needed to be adjusted. No, yeah, it's fun. Yeah, so we definitely like speedrun internally the game, like parts of the game or different fights for balancing reasons, which is a really fun example. I'm trying to like, I wouldn't say that I tried to actively like optimize a speedrun on anything in the past. Like I definitely have friends, and like one of my cousins was like a Ocarina of Time speedrunner for a while. So I've been like, and I'm a huge fan of like AGDQ and summer games done quick, and like I just love the concept of speedrunning and optimizing games and players kind of making their own new games on top of the game and like really learn like, because to speedrun or to do any of these like optimization runs, you have to learn the game at such a low level. The speedrunners end up knowing the game better than the developers do, and that's like such a cool magical thing to see. I mean, I'm even a fan of like the A press runs in Super Mario 64, of like beating levels and limited amounts of the A press. Like I just love all that stuff because it uncovers like all the weird tech and in the bottom of the game, and so I'm a big fan of just in general.
Yeah, you have to be a pretty good video gamer to speedrun. I'm not a particularly decent video gamer, but actually one of
I've
the
seen you
combat
play
designers,
before.
one of the designers on the combat team, a designer named Adam Oliver, I believe, used to. I don't remember which game, but I think he did actually speedrun a few games back in the day. So there's a few people on the team that are into that, but I think what Rob's saying is true. Like as a developer, it's so interesting to follow the speedrun community and see stuff because it's just like this relentless pursuit of optimization. And we actually have someone on. Oh, I forgot. We have someone on our QA team that actually was a speedrunner, and he actually, for our own understanding of like how levels are loaded and everything, I believe he does actually speedrun the game to make sure that we're not breaking our level loading scheme and things like that. I remember something on the last game on God of War 2018. He found a way to get to like trying to remember what it was, but it was way faster than any of us had thought possible. And we're like, oh god, this breaks everything. So I'm glad he was on the QA team. I believe I think Daniel. But yeah, I think never really tried doing that myself, but yeah, definitely seen a lot of your videos. As you know, all three of us commented on your old OG Valkyrie speedrun
Yes.
back
Oh
on
yeah, the old Valkyrie
God of
run.
War 2018, which people don't know that was before. I mean, that's like OG, right? We picked a video
Yeah, it was
that
very
was
early on.
yeah, before it got all optimized in New Game Plus and all that kind of stuff. But back in the day when it was still kind of unknown how things should work, and people started figuring out that the Blades delay R2 attack was kind of the highest single target DPS, and figuring that out. And I'm seeing it also on
The blades keep doing it. Yeah.
yeah, blades are still there. Although the fastest cannot
Yeah.
clear time is not with the blades. If you haven't seen it, there's some
No,
out
no,
there.
I know which one you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's
so
definitely some
it's
builds
always
that are
exactly
ridiculous.
right. So like seeing what people come up with and optimize, and everyone's always so that's the other thing we love is everyone's always so confident when they find something. We always see the YouTube videos, it's like best build possible, and then like 2 days later someone's found a better build, and it's awesome to see. A lot of respect for players trying to figure that whole puzzle out.
Now, do you guys think about like speed running or challenge runs when you're trying to balance the combat of the game? Is that anything that's considered in there, or is it
I
more
mean,
of just a back thought?
for challenge runs, like I definitely one thing we do on bosses, and that I definitely did a lot of, is make sure that I can beat the boss on Gimme God of War with the lowest possible like equipment and stats that you could have at that point in the game, and make sure I could do it like without getting hit, without using rage, without using any runic attacks. So it's like I'll like load in like level 1 no gear, no perks, Gimme God of War, and like see if I can beat Na Valkyrie Queen, because you want to make sure that the integrity of the fight is there, that you could do that if you were skilled enough and you understood the fight well enough. You don't want to have like things that are too kind of random or chaotic that make it so that's not tenable. So on that side of things, we do it. I don't know if I ever completed my level 1 Gimme God of War no hit, no damage attempt on Na, but I think it's because I got bored after like 10 minutes and she was only at half health. But I've definitely done it at like level 6
This guy,
a bunch of
no
times.
integrity.
I've
No,
definitely done
integrity.
it.
Filthy casual, man.
I feel like if I do it at level 6,
I never knew this, Rob.
with no gear, no perks or whatever, and no rage runics and don't get hit, I'm like, okay, now it's just a matter of doing that over and over again. Yeah. So on that side of things, we do think about challenges. I mean, we think about speedruns, we talk about them a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. You guys want to chime in?
Go ahead, Denny.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we do think about it in terms of like I was saying, I don't think we think about it like in terms of like, speedrunning the whole game or anything like that. But for stuff like balancing the strength of different types of builds, like I was saying, we'll test out like how effective the DPS is, how quick you can kill something. Well, it's also very flexible in terms of like, obviously speedruns, usually it's all about like how fast you can kill them. But also our game, a lot of the challenge of our game is also not dying, right? Especially if the player isn't as skilled. So we'll also balance, defensive pieces of gear. Ideally, they're still somewhat competitive in terms of how fast you can kill them, but you also have the perk that, it's a little safer for players that maybe don't care as much about, squeezing out a few seconds. So it's really like trying to balance all aspects of it. And really what we try to do the most is just to make sure that if there is some best build, like Mihir was saying, ideally it's something that is interesting, and ideally there's like a lot of skill and gameplay that goes into really optimizing and making it fast to kill this character, right? Rather than just ideally there's always some sort of mechanic associated with just like optimizing everything together. And that's why we do a lot of work to just like test things ourselves, even though Rob failed in his quest to defeat
Failed is a questionable term.
We do a lot of things just to try to make sure that the integrity of the combat is there. And we don't know what's going to be fast. We don't know what's going to be the most optimal. And really what we're trying our best to do is design everything such that there's always a customer for each thing. And there's always like a different reason why you might use one thing over another.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think we're primarily, when we think about things, our first responsibility is this fun, right? And fun means different things to different people, right? There are people on the that speed running and optimizing and really doing that is the most fun thing for them. For a lot of people, it's the fantasy fulfillment, right? Of like, well, I'm playing God of War, I'm playing as Kratos,
Yep.
I get to go in there and do this, right? And we look across all of our players and we try to say, I'll bring back that phrase of, is there a customer for everything that's in the game, right? Can players, all different types of players, derive fun from different aspects? And I think we're always interested in kind of raising that floor. Then we'll spend a little bit of time being like, hey, we want to put some secret sauce in here, right? We want to put some stuff that kind of, players that are looking to dig can find some of that stuff. But the other side of the coin is also making sure that the game itself is loose enough for creativity and experimentation, because we don't know what's possible in the game, right? We put all this stuff in there that can be messed around with by different players, and ultimately you want that player expression to kind of kick in there and discovery to kick in there, where the community is driving, right, what the life of the game is going to be. And there's no way that we can know that, but what we can do is we can set up the systems in a way where even things that seem like they're kind of rigid, actually there are exceptions, there are ways to kind of break that. In fact, just the other day I was looking at a video online where someone discovered that the hateful draugr that you come across the game, which are kind of these mini boss fights that you have, they're kind of infamous in the game. Someone found out that you can actually juggle one of the the hateful draugrs, and actually there's a way to really quickly get through that fight if you figure out that technique. And that's exactly an example of something where, to me, that's awesome. That's fantastic that, there are things that people play, discover, and the systems are loose enough behind the scenes where, even when you think you know everything about the game, there's something that can kind of pop up or come through. And we just hope that the community kind of enjoys finding those things and enjoys sharing them.
I think the biggest question for the speedrunning community at large is why do you guys think jumping got removed? Everybody loves jumping in speedrunning, obviously, because you can break more stuff, but
Yeah, so I mean, this isn't so much for God of War Ragnarok. This is more for, just God of War 2018 going onwards, and can't really speak to that too much, just because we weren't really
Yeah.
involved with a lot of this. But I think it comes back to the direction of the game and what the franchise in transitioning from kind of the older generation of God of War games to this new one. Really just taking a look at everything and revisiting and saying, you know what, we're going to take on a lot in trying to reimagine this franchise, right? Make it a little bit more, grounded. Having a closer camera is a huge, shift to everything that's in the game. Different tone, and the kind of creative direction from right from the top of the game was that we don't want to pursue jumping, at least for this game. We think that there's enough kind of in there that can go forward on it. So yeah, of course, jumping and kind of the player agency that gives you is something there. But I would also say that there's some things that kind of come out in the gameplay and in navigation and just the way you move through the space, where if you don't have that as an option, right? If that's a constraint, there are other things that start to come up and other considerations that you have in the gameplay system as well, right? So even just the evade, right? If you think of the old God of War games, you didn't have this concept of a sidestep into a roll, right? Or the way that works on the buttons. And that was something that we had to completely, iterate on for a long time on God of War 2018 to just find what's that right balance. How is movement going to work? How does it work with a close camera? And so there's almost like as much, if not more, depth in terms of how you just navigate the space, how you reposition, how you control the camera, as there would be with something like jumping. So it's definitely understand the sentiment. But I think when I look back at it, I think the choices that we made led to a richness in the game that we've learned a lot from and kind of iterated on. And I think in Ragnarok we try to even build on that even further.
Gotcha. I know we're getting close to the end here. A couple fun questions though. I got a Groupon for 4 people at Six Flags. It's you 3, and which character are you bringing from the game?
Skilder, hands down.
Skilder, yeah, it is a slam dunk. No.
No, come on, I'm bringing Burger.
I thought I was gonna have an original with that.
Oh,
I was
dude,
like, I'd
wait,
bring
hold on.
Skilder. That
Denny's
guy's
bringing
great. You've been
Burger.
hunting
Dude,
that win forever.
That's true. Burger could fall off of the roller
Yeah,
coaster and be
if
okay.
something attacks us, he'll save us.
Or Lunda. I'd bring Lunda. She'd be fun on a roller coaster.
Lunda's a good one too. I'm sticking with my answer of Skilder. Denny's bringing Burger. Who are you bringing me here?
Oh man,
I mean, Mihir was bringing Skilder too.
I was about to say Skilder is
Yeah,
like
Skilder-
the classic.
Took too long to answer.
No. I enjoy the voice of Durlin. I think Durlin is, as Rob has pointed out multiple times, Durlin, every time he's in a scene, it just kind of elevates it. So if I was at Six Flags on a ride, I feel like he would add something to the experience.
All right. When's Kratos gonna get some boots?
Was
He
he
needs
gonna get
some
some
boots.
boots?
Some boots.
Yes, a
The
fourth
man needs some
piece of
boots.
armor. I don't know. You got to ask him. He's a picky man when it comes to footwear.
Is he
Wait, does
picky when it
Kratos
comes
not
to
wear
his?
boots? Wait, what does Kratos wear? I just don't even know.
His feet are off the bottom of the camera all the time. That's the
I
real
worked
reason.
on this
Yeah.
game for 8 years now, and I don't know.
Until you
what
get into
Kratos
photo
wears
mode
for
and then you see his
footwear.
Uggs. It's got that old pair of Uggs there. Pineapple on pizza. It's the biggest question ever.
I don't like pizza.
I don't eat pizza either. We're the worst people.
Mihir, it's on you.
Mihir, it's up
So-
to you.
Yeah, I like pineapple on pizza. However, for the past 2 years, I have been allergic to
Here it is.
uncooked pineapple. Actually, I can't have it. I love pineapple, but I can't have raw pineapple. My throat gets all messed up. So
All right, so Mihir can't have raw pineapple. I can't have gluten, so I can't even have the dough in pizza. And Denny, who knows what's going on with Denny?
I just don't
So-
like pizza.
There it
he
is.
just doesn't like pizza.
Yeah, we have good excuses,
The
Mihir and I.
saddest
have no good
response to this
excuse.
question.
Yeah.
What about Kratos? What do you think he would do? Throw it out.
He
think
doesn't-
he'd eat it.
He doesn't need a snack. That's the one thing I know.
That's true.
It's pizza.
Although we
snack,
have
though.
seen him eat, in God of War
He eats the
Ragnarok, he's
sausage.
eating
He
at
likes
the table.
sausage. Yeah.
Yeah, does he like pineapple? I don't know.
He would eat the tier sausage pizza.
Ugh. Be questionable. Questionable. Let's see here. Last thing I wanted to ask you guys, as far as schooling goes, see, Mihir, you were USC, Rob, NYU, Denny, Rit, right?
Yeah.
Am I right on all those?
Yep.
What things from a schooling like program or activity, Mega, the escort quest behind the blindfold? What maybe influenced you guys, and what could you say from schooling that would help somebody trying to get into the business?
Rob is bursting at the seams here, so let's
yeah.
let's start with
Come on.
Rob.
I got into games in my time at NYU, sort of like my senior year, my last year. So shout outs to the NYU Game Center folks for sort of like, they're the reason I'm in games right now. Is they got me interested in it. Shout outs to Charles Pratt, Frank Lance, Naomi Clark, that whole group, because they really mentored and fostered like a really deep love of games, but also just like thinking about games place in the world, thinking about systems, being a creative, like honing your art form, learning about the world, learning about games, and just like, I mean, even like the appreciation of speedrunning and fighting games, all that stuff I got from Charles early on. And they just have a certain way of making you think deeply about design, has always stuck with me. And so it's not even that I took like specific trade skills out of that experience, because I was already a senior at college by the time I even started tinkering with games. But it was more just like how they set me up to like find and foster my interest and my creativity and think about games. And then also like they just had a great community there for the years to come. So even once I was outside of school, and this is true of a lot of cities, is though it might be universities or events for like games or like public lecture series or conferences or like festivals, so like Indiecade or student game showcases at different schools that you could go to even once you're out of college. And that's what I did a lot of, and that's where actually I did a lot of my learning, was those years after college when I was still just going to a bunch of events. So yeah, I don't know. For me, it's always stuck with me, and I'm still super close with them. So that's kind of my answer.
For comedic effect, let's go to Denny next.
I went to college at a time before like games courses were a thing. So I actually was like a computer science major. So my biggest advice for anyone that actually wants to like get into the industry would be just learn programming, like actually learn the technical skills of what it takes to create like a game from scratch, like create your own games. There's a lot of different before I even went to college, I was working on RPG Maker and making a bunch of like stupid little JRPG games. And that taught me a lot about what it takes to actually, create something. I never finished a game. It's very hard to finish a JRPG.
But yeah, definitely to echo that. Yeah.
But it's very important just for you to just get the experience of just creating like with your own hands, like by yourself, just understanding like everything that goes into making a game, because it's extremely hard. And even if you want to be a game designer, right? Like it's very important for you to understand that even if you're not going to be in there like doing actual programming, if you're going to be doing more scripting stuff, it's still very important for you to understand all the technical skills that go into that side.
For my part, I have students reach out all the time, and I kind of tell them very similar things, which is, I echo Denny's sentiment over nothing is a better teacher than doing. During my time in college, I would say the most valuable aspects of it were just working on game projects, participating in game events. I did, game jams every single year, did multiple different, projects with different people. And then I would also say fostering a community or a group of friends that have similar kind of interests and passion. They will, serve you with a lot of support and motivation, because it's hard, right? Game development's challenging. Getting into the gaming industry is challenging. There's so many different ways to do it. But I think when I look back, and I'm still, very close friends with multiple people that I went to college with and kind of graduated in the same year, and we're all kind of doing different things in the game space and across the industry, checking in with one another, seeing how we're doing. I think that's, super important as well. So I think, hands-on experience, definitely there's a lot to learn from different people and the classes and things that you have. But I think that experience is honestly the best teacher. And then having the support group, and here's the other little secret, is that when you're when you're a student, all of your friends are also students, right? No one kind of has done, or maybe most people maybe haven't done a lot of noteworthy things, but 10 years from then, your friend group is going to be maybe a very powerful kind of network within the industry, right? When everyone's kind of gone off and done stuff. And I feel like that's for me, something I really take to heart and I really value is that whether I have friends doing startups and their own indie game companies, whether they're in other positions at other studios, like it's very, very, very valuable to cultivate that. So so I guess you get different takes from different people. Like Denny, I also was a computer science major in college, so can't stress that enough. That having a technical background helps. If only Rob was technical. That's all I can say.
I was a film major, believe it or
If
not.
if Rob learned programming, maybe he could beat Naganav with level
All
1
right.
gear.
I feel like I submitted the most actual code on this project than anybody here, so let's let's ease off a little bit. Yeah, like Denny actually, when Denny was doing RPG Maker, I was using Flash. I was making Adobe Flash Builder Flixel games. So shout outs to Flixel for my original games that I was tinkering with in college and right out of college. Those are the days.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I think that's about all I have for you guys. Just wanted to thank you guys so much for actually coming and talking to me. This is a huge thing for me, and I really, really do appreciate it.
Oh yeah, it's a huge thing for us as well. Like I said, we've seen your content. We obviously did that IGN video talk through, and since then, seeing all the videos that you've put up for Ragnarok, and I think for us, it's just a joy to see people invest in the game, right? Like we put so much of our lives into this game and putting everything in there. And for players like yourself that really dig into it, find stuff, you're trying different builds, trying different fights, creating your own kind of rules for how you want to go through something, whether it's through YouTube videos, streams, Twitter, whatever it is, like can't say enough how much we appreciate it. For just kind of being part of this community and being supportive of other things. That's the other thing we're super grateful to see. It's not just like a community that's into the game, but it's a community that is like all about like celebrating other community members.
It is a
you're involved
great community.
Yeah, it's super special. And not just the three of us, but I kind of speak on behalf of the studio that's one of the most rewarding aspects of working on a game like God of War Ragnarok is just seeing how the community responds to it. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys. And there you have it. Thank you again to Mihir, Rob, and Denny for taking the time to sit down. I do appreciate it. Thank you again to Sony. And I can't wait to see what happens in New Game Plus. I'm excited. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Bye-bye.